So to get a little bit deeper on exactly the most egregious mistakes, I know in the very beginning you and I talked about what are some of the things that brands are doing wrong, and I call that two things in particular, but there's a few more. So the internal linking is a big one. Sometimes what happens is brands will include too few links, and this kind of falls a little bit into the idea of siloing that we were talking about, just not adding enough links so that if you mention a topic, you should link out to it within reason. I'm not going to put any numbers out there and say, well, X number of words or X percentages. I'm not a fan of like the algorithms, page rank sculpting kind of concept of SEO where you have to have a certain percentage of. That's just I prefer to think about it in terms of user experience. If I mention a topic, I'll link to it. If I feel like I might have too many links on the page, I'll remove the ones that feel less relevant to me. Just because I mentioned content strategy, I might include a link, but then if I get, if I add a whole bunch of additional links to the page, I might say, I don't really need that anymore. And it's not core to the piece. It's just a sort of tangential relevant mention, then I would remove that. But make sure you're not being too sparse with your links, or you're not going to be passing the value or those signals. Too many links obviously looks spammy. That's the biggest one. A user reading it and seeing one or two links per sentence is going to look really atrocious. They're not going to know what to click on. It doesn't look right. And then there's also the idea that if you have way too many links on your page, you could dilute some of the outbound page rank value that flows from it. Using the wrong anchor tag. This is, I think, one of the bigger internal linking mistakes that I see happening, where it can happen one of two ways. Either you've got two internal links on the same post with the same anchor, say content strategy, and they both link to different pages. That is, in my mind, it's more of like you're telling Google that both of those pages are about that exact thing. Maybe they are both about content strategy in some way, but you should be a little more specific. I think that's the big point, is try to use either broad match or use the specific anchor that the page is about. So if it's about content strategies, great. If it's about how to build them, great. And don't worry about, if I use the keyword, I might get penalized. So it's your website. You're allowed to do what you want. So I would say be descriptive as possible, but make sure your anchor is unique to each page and also describes the keyword that you're targeting. And then the wrong placement is the other one, where sometimes there's this idea that, you have to put all your links at the top of the page because that's the most valuable place. And there was some truth to that in the past. And maybe if you strip away every other signal in the universe that Google uses, and you just say, is a link worth more if it's higher on the page? Okay, maybe infinitesimally, yes, if that's the only thing you're looking at. But when you start thinking about relevance, and when you start thinking about context, if you mention that keyword in the first paragraph, but then you have an entire subheading about it with an H1 or an H2 rather, and you're talking about it in 3 paragraphs, and you mention the word 10 times, that's where I would put the link. I wouldn't worry about trying to squeeze it in at the top just because it may have some more value. I think there's much more value in putting it in a place that's relevant for users and tells Google a bit more about where it's going. And we did mention the idea of rudderless content as being another problem that sends brands astray. One of the things that's problematic with it is retargeting the same keyword over and over again, like we talked about, where you think you're kind of creating unique content, but it's essentially targeting the same keyword with the same intent or slight variations of that keyword, where Google will really just be looking to rank one page for all of those. Then that extends to users, where if you think about the user experience around redundant content, imagine if a user comes to your website, they read a post and they get a lot of value about it, and then you tell them, oh, check this other post about this topic, and then they go and they read it, and it's rehashing the same ideas. And if that happens too often, then they're going to start to think, well, you're just spinning content, you're not really providing additional value. I'm probably not going to come back and read that. And then finally, creating sparse clusters, which is, maybe you start the idea of, hey, we're going to create a topic cluster around this theme, and you build out a pillar page, and maybe one additional cluster page, and that's it. And you just kind of lose interest in it or something. Well, now your pillar page doesn't have any supporting content, because it in it of itself is really intended to be a high level overview. So it doesn't really get into detail or depth on any of the subtopics, and you don't have any subtopic pages that do that as well. So now everything just kind of feels like pretty thin. And if that happens over and over again, then you really end up running into problems. And to that point about siloed content, a little bit more depth on that. I think there's a couple of different thought processes about what that exactly means. I do subscribe to the idea of siloing, in the idea that you're grouping content within sort of silos of categories or relevance, like a topic cluster or a category page. But I think that the broader definition of siloing that tends to be used in the SEO community is more about locking it in. And I don't subscribe to that, which is essentially like you're not allowed to link out of this topic cluster to any other clusters at all, because the thought behind that is to keep everything relevant within the cluster and make it this like echo chamber of relevance. But I think that the downside of that is there's no such thing as a topic or a subject that exists in a vacuum. It's sort of as a core central piece that fades out, and there's like Venn diagrams of things that connect to it. So, I mean, if you think about dogs and cats, those aren't two different things, right? Those are completely different things. They shouldn't be in the same cluster, but they're both pets, right? So there's an overlap. So I think of clusters as just sort of related topics, and there's always room to overlap, and there's always room to link out, and that does provide additional context for Google and passes PageRank. So think of siloing more as like, how do I kind of contain the relevance, but then also link out where it's appropriate to other topics. And that, again, just kind of really stifles the context for Google to understand beyond the other topics that exist, and it holds back the ability to pass that page rank and backlinks. And then you think about UX too, like if a user's in a reading a blog post about some topic and they're really interested in it, and you mention something in a subheading somewhere that's part of a different cluster, but you didn't link to it, you didn't suggest that you even have content about it, and that user is interested in it, they're going to go back to Google and they're going to look for the answer there, and you may or you may not show up. So I think that you're creating unnecessary barriers for users by not linking out and exposing users to other content outside of a single cluster.
Now, if you liked this Clearscope webinar snippet, don't forget to share, like, and subscribe so you don't miss out on more great tips and strategies from the industry's best SEOs and content marketers. Make sure to check out the Clearscope YouTube channel for more great content.